Good. Had the wrong backdrop up there. Sorry about that. Good evening. This is Dry Bones, and guess what? So Vicky and I have such a very, very special guest. Our guest is just amazing. Okay, and before we bring our guest on, we're going to show a short video clip. So I'm not even going to talk that much tonight, believe it or not. So here we go.
Now to a story about one of the most sensitive subjects imaginable, the abuse of children. There are some people who think attitudes and actions towards pedophiles should be adjusted. Correspondent Shannon Bream explains.
A small group of psychiatrists and other mental health professionals is advocating changes to the way the American Psychiatric Association defines pedophilia in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM, saying those they call minor attracted persons are being unfairly stigmatized.
Instead, a psychiatric term gets turned into something that's just a demonizing pejorative. That troubles me.
Dr. Fred Berlin, associate professor at Johns Hopkins University Medical School, was the keynote speaker at a conference held by the group in Baltimore, Maryland last week. He says those pushing to redefine pedophilia are simply worried that the current perception keeps adults who are attracted to children from getting help.
If there are people out there who are attracted through no fault of their own towards children, we want to try to assist them to make sure they don't act in ways that are going to cause problems for other people.
But Berlin admits there were some at the conference who suggested sexual relations between adults and children are acceptable, something he says he does not condone. Dr. Judith Reisman, author of Sexual Sabotage, attended the event.
The whole conference was slanted very clearly to the notion that pedophilia was a normal variation of human sexual conduct.
In 1990 and 1992, the Baltimore Sun reported that Berlin refused to comply with a state law requiring him to report patients he believed were engaged in child sex abuse, instead directing them to first see a lawyer who could then direct them to Berlin, thus protecting any conversation under the attorney-client privilege. The Maryland Attorney General deemed that illegal. Today, Berlin labeled the accusation that he would refuse to report a pedophile actively engaged in child abuse, quote, absolutely false. Skeptics say the group Berlin spoke to has one goal: to move society a step closer to accepting sexual contact between adults and children, even decriminalize it.
Absolutely. Oh, they're very clear about that. Their goal is to take all shame out of the lust for children.
When asked for comment today, the American Psychiatric Association said sexual abuse of minors is a crime and, quote, we stand firmly behind efforts to criminally prosecute those who engage in it. In Washington, Shannon Bream, Fox News.
Well. Let's welcome Dr. Judith Reisman to the show. And Dr. Reisman, thank you so much for just for being here and just for being willing to come on and to do what you do so well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I just wish at this point, since it's been going on for so long, that we were able to stem this massive flood, and that has not been possible. Yeah.
Amen. So I definitely want to, before we go to your website and everything else, I was born in 1972.
Oh, you're a kid.
Oh, thank you. That really makes me feel good right now. And
That's okay. That's okay. I talk to kids all the time. Yeah.
I feel kind of giddy right now having Dr. Judith Reisman on the show.
Me too.
So, and I suffered at the hands of many child molesters, pedophiles. And at the same time, I was very sexualized as a child, and didn't feel like having those relations with men were all that bad, because I was looking for love, right? And in all the wrong places, all the wrong faces, and all of that stuff. But it was, I used to sneak away to the library to look for National Geographic magazine to see all of the pictures of the naked people, and go look for the books in the library that had the pictures of the naked people, and
You don't have to look anymore. They're yeah,
Everywhere.
yeah. Well, no, especially in the library.
yeah, and it's
Mm.
everywhere. So, when I grew older and got involved in the things that I was involved in, and I came out of it, right, and get healed, like a miraculous healing of full-blown AIDS, of infections in my brain and blood, all of that. And then I learned about Alfred Kinsey and what he was.
Yeah.
And I so could see as I was learning, because, last year, we, a group of us, Dave Daubenmeyer, Coach Dave Daubenmeyer, Past Assault Ministries, and I went out with a group of men to Indianapolis University, and to the Kinsey Institute outside, and did, what was it called? An induction. We tried and convicted Alfred Kinsey outside of the Kinsey Institute for pedophilia.
Wow.
It was a really powerful presentation, and a lot of students were like, "What are you doing? What are you talking about? What do you mean he was a pedophile?" And we were able to share a lot of handouts and a lot of information about him. So, and I have to thank you for that, because it was your research that helped me build those flyers.
Oh, I'm so grateful to hear that. Thank you so much. I have to say, yes, it's vital that people understand the history of how we got to this massive abuse of our children.
Right.
And they don't know. They purposefully don't know the history. I mean, Alfred Kinsey, remember, this is 1948, and you're talking about 1970. You're already, when you were born, I guess, right? Yeah. So when you were like 10 years old, 1970, 1980, we're talking about 3 generations. No, 2, let's see, 1949, 50, 60, 70, 80. Yeah, 4 generations have been, 4 decades rather, have been, which is two generations, have been inundated with Kinsey's fraud about human sexuality. It is not, and people say, well, it's, what do they want to say? It's not fraud, but something else. I forget. Flawed. No, I said it's not flawed. It's fraud.
It's flawed.
Yeah, I mean, for crying out loud. This man changed this nation and the world sexually. He did. And I don't need to tell you, one of the biggest promotions was for homosexuality in the beginning, because of course he was homosexual. Well, he was bi homosexual, take your pick, but he preferred guys, he preferred boys. And he was a sadomasochist. Yeah. A sadomasochist and a pedophile, more a pederast, really, but it's, And
could you give a quick explanation of the difference between a pederast and a pedophile for those?
Well, pedophile usually applies in reality, but today it's been normal. Today it's been used to refer to any adult who has sexual leanings toward a child. All right. But pederasty, which was known in the Greek long time, as well as pedophilia, was male sexual lust for boys. So that would have been Kinsey, really, in effect. But, this was a man who tortured himself so badly in terms of his masturbatory activity that we believe logically that it was that kind of thing in association with his sex with males, his subjects, for crying out loud. I mean, he was supposed to be an objective scientist, and he's having sex with his students, with his colleagues, with his subjects. Yeah. And, and he's the guy that, as you know, probably created the lie that 10% to 37% of our male population are essentially homosexual at different points in time to orgasm. The Kinsey scale is everywhere. You can find it in the school books, you can find it on the web, you can find it everywhere. The Kinsey scale. Yeah.
So, Dr. Reisman, these statistics then that he put out, like this percentage is homosexual, and regardless of his research, was he just pulling this out of thin air, or how and where and how was he obtaining these random statistics? What was he getting his data from?
Well, first of all, we found out that he could claim he'd have 21,000, 18,000 people that he had interviewed, and so on and so on. It turns out that one of his close colleagues said, the fact is, and I checked this, it was correct, Kinsey had thrown out 3/4 of the people that he interviewed. They were not in his data. He still kept them as numbers, but he never used those data. So that was, of course, another fraud. But the fact is, he did most of his collecting, of people during World War II. And during World War II, you're too young, both of you, to know anything there. But we grew up with those posters everywhere. Loose lips sink ships. You were not allowed to speak. You could not speak to anyone about your private life. It was just not. It was just not going to happen. So he did not have access. Not that he wanted to, but he didn't have access to normal American men or normal American women, because they were also working in the factories. They also were family members of military people and so on. And so it turns out 86% of the people he interviewed were really interviewed during World War II. And that meant that they were prisoners. They were in and out, because he interviewed a lot of pedophiles. He says so. Incest offenders, rapists, and feeble-minded. He said he also was in the mental hospitals. He went to the cruise school for Negro boys and the one for Negro girls. I've forgotten which was which, Randall School. And we know that what was going on in those orphanages were not good things at all. There was a lot of abuse. He never reported a single thing about the abuse, not once, though he claimed he went into all these places where the children were and nobody would be watching him and his team. It's the most shameful, except for MK Ultra and the CIA, and it turns out he was involved in that too. But okay, it's the most shameful, record that we have, because there were thousands of children who were being raped, who were being around the clock, and he printed his tables, his famous tables, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, showing children who were screaming, I'm quoting him, screaming, writhing in pain, striking the man he defined as their partner. Oh, yes, there's table 34. Yeah. There you are. The top one is a 5-month-old. There's a 4-year-old there who was being raped throughout the 24 hours, he says, and had 26 what he called orgasms. Excuse me? So I looked up what he, I said, what is this guy saying? What is he saying when I read this? And I thought, what does he call an orgasm? I was sure he would never define it, I mean, he wouldn't. Well, he did. He did. He wrote about what he called an orgasm, which was when these children, and he says, weeping, hysterical tears, especially among the younger children. This is one of the few times he used the word children. Most of the time, he'd say they were pre-adolescents. Language is very important. And they were writhing in pain, and they were having convulsions. And he concluded and told the world. And by the way, it was printed and is printed in the sex education manuals, the most famous ones, Crooks and Bear on human sexuality. They quote him like this is the word manna from heaven. He's telling the truth. They quote him saying that these children really enjoyed the experience because they returned to have more of the same.
My goodness.
I mean, and our nation and the globe, he's and Planned Parenthood, SECUS was founded at the Kinsey Institute. That's Sex Education Council of the United States. Planned Parenthood, essentially, it's an arm of Planned Parenthood, but and it was founded at the Kinsey Institute to do our sex education.
And Dr. Reisman, can you talk a little bit about some of the major funders of SECUS and who's?
Sure, but before I do that, I want to mention one more thing in the day of Me Too, right?
Okay.
Kinsey claimed in black and white in his female book that he interviewed 4,441 women, right? That's what he claimed. And there was never really any harm from rape. No, women didn't say that they were raped. There was maybe one case, but it did no appreciable harm, right? Are you going to believe that? People believe that? Look, I'm the first person to say in 1949, in 1948, there was certainly, 1930s, there was certainly nothing like the rate of rape and sexual abuse of children, sexual abuse of women at that time, nothing like it, absolutely. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that out of 4,441 women, as an expert scientist, I will claim and tell the world that there was no real, and now why did he say there's no real harm? Okay. The reason that he'd say there's no real harm was the same reason that he said you could sodomize children and there was no real harm. You could do all this stuff because he wanted to change the laws, which he did via Planned Parenthood and SECUS. He wanted, and the other funder, which was Rockefeller, we'll mention that. Hold it. So he wanted to change the laws. In order to change the laws, you had to establish the fact that these old Judeo-Christian laws, which could punish rape by death in half the states and in the other half by life, that they were so foolish because there were no consequences from rape, no consequences from child abuse because it wasn't abuse, it was, just play. No consequences from the breakdown of the family, no consequences from any of these things. Therefore, we built what was called a model penal code. He was cited in that model penal code, the first one on human sexuality, sex offenses. He tells the world through that legal establishment that There are no consequences to these things, so we have to change all of our laws. And we did. So he was funded by Rockefeller. He was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, by Playboy. Yeah.
Yes.
Why? Because Hugh Hefner was a virgin in college, a 22-year-old virgin. You're young. You're very young. You don't know this, but this was not unusual. Guys were preserving themselves for their loved one. They were going to be married. They were going to, so college guys really were not doing this. And his own people said so in a major book that was published. And they didn't know couldn't understand it. Anyway, so no, so that was not unusual. He was a 22-year-old virgin in college. He read Kinsey's book on sexual behavior in the human male sex. Then he read the female, and he said he would be Kinsey's pamphleteer. So what Kinsey was to science, he would be to the rest of the population and to the college boys. You changed the college boys, you changed the world.
Mhm.
And he did.
Absolutely. Well, it doesn't take much to connect the dots here, but just for anyone who missed it, we actually have a comprehensive sex education bill going forth in our country right now,
Yeah.
where the curriculum is being supplied by CCAS, which was funded basically by the porn industry.
Oh, yeah, definitely. CCAS and the porn industry have worked hand in glove, and now Big Pharma. Yeah, because think about it. My goodness. What money is there in a husband and wife who get married and they haven't, and they don't have any VDs and they don't have any Viagra problems? Grandpa used to have 13 children, right? I mean,
Right.
maybe it was too many, but he didn't have a Viagra problem. And the vaccines for all that. And now, of course, we're moving into transgender things. And so that's cut and paste. That's surgery. That's hormones. That's, that's everything. So, yeah, Big Pharma makes a fortune from dysfunction, from sexual dysfunction.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking too about a lot of what they're not telling the public about these gender blockers and the side effects and the surgeries and there's so much repercussions when this doesn't go perfectly, which it doesn't go perfectly for a lot of people. There's so many more health issues that come as a result of these things.
And suicidal ideation.
Yes.
People, come on, because when you're born, you are who you are. We're not talking about intersex, so we're not talking about people who are born with that particular reality to deal with. Right. But in the intersex population has complained loudly about the idea that they are being put into the same category as transgender, because it's not the same at all. And they have a real issue that they had nothing to do with, that they have to deal with. Yeah. So anyway, the kids, parents, nobody's being told the truth. And of course, the mass media is completely controlled. The last I saw, six companies or something controlling the mass media. They are all singing out of the same hymn book, but it's not. Their hymns are a little different than ours. Yeah, and
their hymns are them actually.
Yeah.
Days and thems.
Yes.
Yes.
I wanted to jump in real quick. One of the important factors about the intersex, because back in my day, there was no intersex, there was no transgender. It was your tranny, transsexual, or a hermaphrodite. And one thing I learned early on, having been able to meet some hermaphrodites and become really close with them, is that never in history has a hermaphrodite been born with two total, complete, functioning sex organs, and that their DNA always coincided with the one sex that was complete, total, and functioning. And that was because there was a young she was a young lady. When she was born, she was intersex, but her DNA, had they checked, right, or known to check, would have said she was a male, or would have said that she was a female, but they chose male.
Okay.
And then at about 9 or 10 years old, she started bleeding through her medically created penis. And and so there you had issues and problems, and she never felt like a boy.
No.
But she thought she was a gay boy. She thought she was homosexual because she was a boy, but she was attracted to boys, and she didn't want to be a boy. She wanted to be a girl. And it's all because she was truly a girl, kind of like Dr. Reisman, you'd probably know the name. I think it's the
Joan. Yeah, Joan, the Joan case.
I think so. And then there was the David.
Yeah, David. Yeah, David. Yeah, which was that was the John, whatever. Yeah, and it was John Money, Dr. John Money of Johns Hopkins. You just saw that TV blip with Fred Berlin of Johns Hopkins. Fred Berlin, Dr. Berlin, was Dr. Money's young accolade, and they worked together. John Money wrote or was interviewed by the Journal of Pedophilia. And in the Journal of Pedophilia, John Money said to pedophiles and to everybody who would, also who would believe them, but it was a journal for pedophiles and pederasts. John Money said that he only started his clinic at Johns Hopkins, which was allegedly to help homosexual. I think it was just homosexuals. No. It was predators of various kinds, sexual predators. He only started it to give leeway to judges. I'm quoting, leeway to judges, so that they would not have to incarcerate a rapist of a child. Well, now when Fred Berlin claimed that he at the time would never not report a rapist, a child rapist, to the Attorney General, that I believe was quite disingenuous, because we know that
Mooney, right?
Yeah, Money, M-O-N-E-Y.
Money was a pedophile. I mean, and he was taking pictures of the boy and they were both boys, but one was transitioned to a girl, and so he was taking naked pictures of them in sexual positions and all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, it's called child pornography. Yeah,
right, exactly.
Forcing the one to mount the other, little boys, so that he could get his jollies. But who
think that they're brother and sister.
Yeah, well, yes. Now, David knew, of course, all along. He felt all along that he was not a little girl. Yeah. But Money, of course, money. Oh boy, I crossed swords with John Money at a conference on love, and it was the one in Jerusalem. But anyway, that was interesting. So Money was very, he was the one who convinced, he convinced the parents that he would change the sex, and David would not feel like David anymore. He would, so he would be Joan. That's what it was, Joan. So they listened to him, poor folks, and they ended up with both of them, by the way, the twins committing suicide, eventually. But David did return to his masculine, world.
Yeah, he actually got married, didn't he?
Yes, he got married to a lady who had a couple of children, and so he could, feel that he could be a father. But the damage done to him was so extreme, so extreme. I mean, I can't think of. Well, we're doing it to the little children now.
Yes, we are.
We're cutting, and we're filling them with drugs. We're and we're driving them crazy with their in their minds and in their hearts, and setting them apart from their parents. And now, unless the parents used to be, they called the parents, the mothers, and she would bring her little girl to the producer so that she could, pimp out her little girl, right? Well, I mean, nowadays we have parents doing that, pimping out their children as transgender,
Yeah.
Yeah, like this.
Desmond, the one that they call Amazing Desmond, he acted like and was just like any other little boy. And he was about 4 years old. He was playing with little boys' trucks and little boys' toys, and he acted like a little boy, and he dressed like a little boy. And his mom sat him down and watched RuPaul's Drag Race and told him, honey, you would be so amazing if you were like them. Think of how great you would be. You would be just wonderful. Now, when you tell a child you could be or you would be anything, if you do this, chances are that's going to be their complete desire and their lifelong dream is to be amazing and wonderful. Sure. But not only that, I can assure you that there were a lot of threats that went with it. I definitely.
Parents, it's not just you would be beautiful. And if you don't do this, you will disappoint your movie star mother who never got to be the hot shot she wanted to be.
That's right.
Because she wants to shine. She wants people to clap for her. That's the whole deal. You sell your child, and there will be a huge audience out there for you. That's where that whole thing works out. Yep.
You know what, Dr. Reisman, it's so everything, I went to Kenyon College a couple years ago, and I went into their gun gallery, and on their wall, in their gallery, in their art gallery, was straight up child pornography.
Where was this?
Kenyon College in Gambier, Ohio. And it was so dark, the quote unquote artwork that they had up there, that another brother went in there the next day, because I did a show on it when I was there, or the next day I did a show on it. And the next day a brother went to Kenyon College, and he went up there and he took pictures with his phone of all the pictures hanging up, and he went down to the sheriff's department.
Yeah.
And he said, look at these. And the deputy said, I know, there's nothing we can do about it. It's deemed artwork. But if I find it on your computer or you don't get it off your phone.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah.
Can I add some? This fits in, David, with what you were saying. One of the books that they're going to be using as curriculum in this CSE. Do you know the name of it, Dr. Reisman? It's
Perfectly Normal.
Yes, thank you. It was not allowed to be shown on the news because it was too offensive, and it's cartoony, but anyone into anime, we know that cartoons and animation can get quite graphic. And so it's these pictures, and it's talking about, what certain bodily fluids taste like, and anal sex doesn't hurt, it's wonderful, and all this stuff. This is 5th grade curriculum, so this is for the 10-year-olds. And similar to what David was saying, when Minneapolis it kicked up a lot of dirt here, and we're like, if you can't play it on the news for responsible adults who are up till 10 p.m., how can you show our 10-year-olds in the public schools? And there is this little loophole in the law, and it's not in all 50 states, but there's this little loophole in the law where
obscenity exemption.
Thank you. Yes, the obscenity that means
exemption. Yeah,
exactly.
And anybody who wants to get that list of laws should get in touch with me. We have it all put together.
Oh, I'm so glad that you have that, because I had it in my notes and didn't want to dig for it. But yeah, so if something's educational, it's okay, and it doesn't matter if it's a kindergartner or a 10-year-old, and who cares if this is going to perhaps be information too soon, traumatic, sexual awakening.
You are traumatizing these children. You're traumatizing them.
Hey, folks, is this what you want your children and your grandchildren to see? You want them to read a book in sex education about making homosexual love, about how the ancient Greeks thought that love between two men was the highest form of love? Is that what you want them to read? You want them to read about regular sexual intercourse? How about you want them to see pictures of two men? And I think is this the book, Dr. Reisman? Is this the book that actually has a section in it about when somebody comes to visit, and it shows an older man and a younger boy in bed together? It just struck me that it may be because of the graphics and the artwork.
I don't know about that, but it's demonstrating how to masturbate to the children. Your cartoon. Yeah, cartoons are very important. Do not misunderstand me. In a cartoon, you can show things you could never show in real life. You can move the bodies in ways that you could never do because you wouldn't be able to see component parts. Yeah. Cartoons were used. Those were the first. Those were the way that was the way Playboy introduced children. In Playboy was first through cartoon. I won the case in the Netherlands against Playboy. Did you know?
No, I didn't know that.
So let me brag.
I learned so much when I either listen to you or read your work.
Okay. Well, the Netherlands. I did a show in the Netherlands, and I said on that show, because our research for the Department of Justice, Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, our research back in it ended in 85, covered Playboy and other magazines from its initial issue, 1953, to 1983, something like that. Well, anyway, and we calculated how many scenes of children were in Playboy, which we could easily do because we had criteria to identify, what was a child. And people under 18, only under 18, I think we even stuck with, no, it was under 18, not 8. Okay. So the cartoons originally were all little boys. It grew, that was in the 50s. By the 60s, it was little girls in bed with men. But the biggest, the largest number were in 1971, 72, were little girls in sex scenes with older men and that kind of thing. And they were cartoons. But then they also had photographs. The photographs were from foreign films. They would have outcuts from foreign films. Anyway, so I was in the Netherlands, and I said that at that time, 1994, I said Playboy is the largest producer of child pornography in the nation, or really, I think I said in the world. And so Playboy sued me for libel, slander and libel. And guess what? The judge, I sent a huge truck, little trunk of pictures with dates and, pages and everything else to the judge. And he ruled that, no, I didn't libel them, because that's what this is. These are children in scenes. And I said, this is the biggest promoter of child sexual abuse in the world at that time, because Playboy had the largest subscription, the largest readership, consumership, both registered and then secondhand and Passover, and that passing it on to others. So they lost. I know you did not read about that in the front page of the New York Times.
No, I didn't.
My goodness, I don't know how they missed it. So, so not only did they lose, but after they lost, the lawyer protested to the judge and said, this isn't right, or something like that. He didn't not like the decision. And the judge said, well, then sue her in the United States. You have adequate resources to do it there. And I always say, wherever I am, and I'll say it on this program, do sue me. Sue me. You did it in the Netherlands, try it in the USA, because if the American people saw how they had been your grandfather, your father, your uncle, your brother, your sisters now, because it's everybody. If you saw how you had been tricked, how you had been conned, how you had been lied to, first by Kinsey, who stretched that out to Playboy, who became the pamphleteer to the world, pornographic world, who stretched that into the law, changing our laws. And by the way, it was through the American Law Institute Model Penal Code that you got the obscenity exemptions.
There you go.
Cool.
Wow. I don't even know what to say. I really don't. I don't even know what to say, Dr. Reisman. You're just.
It's really, they're fighting tooth and nail now. We're down at the bottom of the stream here. People have been falling off the cliff for it's been for 3 generations.
So I wanted to, real quick, I wanted to show really you and everybody what I was just referring to about the artwork.
Oh, yes.
At Kenyon College. So just with me for about 10, 15 seconds and I'll get it running. Video. Oh, wait. Okay, that's the one in the, okay, hold on that. Let's go to the photographs. Yeah. See these were artwork. I didn't use the video. I just used the still shots. These were artwork. These are artwork, an artistic expression. And so along the one wall you have these little kids with these masks on. And go ahead to the next photo, Jared. And then when you go on, here's they have child pornography hanging up. And this isn't a painting. This isn't anything but a photograph, a black and white photograph of a little girl naked, pinching her breast, it looks like, with her hand on her hip. And you can see her little lady. It's bold. That's about all I can do.
Well, I say a little bit too much on that one, but I'll tell you, I did the Mapplethorpe trial, which established. I mean, they were doing child pornography in Cincinnati at the museum there, and I was the expert witness, and we did get a decision on the porn at that time, which could still be used to go against this kind of crap stuff, this kind of.
You said it right the first time.
Yeah, well, that's being shown in museums, because these guys could be arrested. Museum owners could be arrested. We could arrest them, try them, and we would do it on the basis of the decision that was really made in the Mapplethorpe trial, which essentially laid down the fact that this stuff was not acceptable. Yeah, there would be many ways to look at it, but that could be done, and we should, of course, eliminate. We're trying to get the Congress to eliminate the from the law somebody eliminate from the law the obscenity exemptions. We have to get those repudiated, and we have to identify how come we all of a sudden had obscenity. Obscenity is against the law. If you're an adult, you're not supposed to be buying, selling obscene material. It's against the law. Pornography is not against the law, but obscene material is. Well, Justice Scalia, oh yeah, that was a great man, Justice Scalia. I've written papers on this. Anybody wants, we have a couple of papers that we produced. I did it with my colleague who's a lawyer on what to do and how to counteract this material. Yeah, and Justice Scalia said, yeah, you cannot. It was in Fox, the broadcast thing, where Fox wanted to be able to get away with giving FUCK words. They were brief. They were just saying. And Scalia said, absolutely not. You cannot do this in the public sphere. And really, the decision, was upheld. You can't do this in the public sphere. The whole effort of Kinsey, of course, and his followers, because they're his followers, has been to establish the fact, again, there are no consequences. Well, look at 13,000 children raping children in schools in 1 year. Now we got the AP, the Associated Press did that investigation. Where's our government? Where's the research coming out? Where's the research? We have all kinds of organizations allegedly out there battling trafficking, but they won't talk about the pornography. We know, my gosh, I do a Google search every day. I get stuff, baby raped, pornography, baby rape. I mean, don't tell me that we can't do anything about that. There are statistics absolutely available. If there were not senators, congressmen, legislators, people on your board who are being blackmailed or who are bribed, one of the two, who are so steeped in their perversion themselves that they counter what you're trying to do out there. So you have to find out who's doing.
Doesn't that make it the same? Doesn't that fall on the same line? I believe it was in Innocence Lost. I believe it was in your book anyway, or one of your books, that where you said that men are less likely to stand up when they support the homosexual cause, because they're less likely to stand up against the immorality of the homosexual movement, because porn supports the homosexual cause. And so wouldn't that fall on the same lines that these Congress people and these judges and these lawyers, they don't want to make those decisions or step on those toes because they are already corrupted. They are already perverted and tainted.
Sure, absolutely. And all you need are a couple, because you need just a couple, because then others who maybe know what they're doing, okay, don't want to say anything because, first of all, they are counting on them to support, their bill or whatever, or because it's going to smear their party if you know that he's a child rapist or something. By the way, child pornography is not just pictures of kids. The child pornography today is sadistic, violent torture. That's what's going on. They did that with the women. Now we're sick and tired of having women. I mean, we don't need women anymore for that kind of stuff. The excitement is going to come out of the fear and the shame and the horror that the human being is feeling. So, you're not shamed. You're not feeling horrible. You're with the woman anymore. It's got to go down to the child. We knew it was going down to the child.
Wow. Let me tell you how spot on you are. Wow. Being a former porn addict, right?
Yeah.
And sexaholic. I know for a fact that it only gets darker and goes deeper. When you get to the point where we're teens, and you're talking about legal teens, 18, 19, 20, don't do it anymore. Then you go to
barely legal. That's what it was called. Yeah.
Barely legal. They call them twinks.
Yeah.
That came out of. And you go to them, and so they're under 18, usually in their mid to late teens. And then after a little while, you don't get the same thrill you get from them anymore.
Why don't you? Because you're actually shamed. You're not sufficiently shamed anymore. You're not sufficiently horrified anymore. That's the high arousal that comes from that.
And that's
what it is.
That's so spot on, because I came to the point where I remember it was when I had osteoporosis really bad, and I was using a walker to get around. And I went to see a friend of mine, and this was about just a few months before I ended up on my deathbed with full-blown AIDS. And I went to see him, and he was a homosexual man, and he had custody of his two sons, and his sons were 6 and 8. And I was on the sitting on his deck, and I'm leaning over the railing, and he went and fixed me a drink. And I was actually watching one of his sons play in the dirt, and I didn't think anything of it. I was just watching him. And he came up and sat the drink in front of me, and he leaned over and he said, "He looks delicious, doesn't he?" And when he turned around, that little boy turned around, and when he looked at me, I saw my face looking back at me when I was 8 years old. And and I left. And as I was driving back home, I didn't say, "God, hear me now," but I pretty much knew who I was talking to. But I said, if I ever cross that line, I'll take my life. And so ultimately, because I've seen it happen, and I know that it happens, I experienced that it could have happened to me. And I remember when I was growing up, and here I am, 14, 15, 16-year-old transgender prostitute. I'm on hormones. I'm HIV positive. I could care less if I live or die, right? And I remember one of my same peers that when I was 14 and found out that I was HIV positive, and I went to him and to others, and I said, "What am I going to do? I'm HIV positive." And they said, "Well, so what? so are we. The one who gave it to you didn't care. Don't you care who you give it to. Just take out as many as you can. And so that same peer said to me, we, meaning transgenders, he said, we are the rich man's fantasy and the poor man's lay. And that was totally on point as well, because I was the rich man's fantasy, and the rich man would pay for the woman that had male genitalia. And the man that wasn't rich, he just wanted to use you for sex, just as something to get off with, much like they use love dolls.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened over the years. These men, they've lost the rush that they got from women with male genitalia or men with women's genitalia, and now they go deeper and darker, and it's a downward spiral. So they go from like bondage and discipline to sadomasochism to very deep child porn, sadistic child porn, and then eventually into like snuff type stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I was just going to say, David, what's the end game? Once we have a society where it's a buffet and you just try every single thing that you want, and you can start so early that by the time you're 20, you're bored because you've done everything 100 times. What is the end game? Once you've done the snuff and the porn and what's the end game? There's a point where there's nothing else to do. So what's the end game? Just the end of our civilization? We just become another Rome?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Our civilization, I'm shocked that we've lasted this long. I really am. I give people credit, that they've sustained, that long. Your Judeo-Christian belief system has, held itself, together a little bit longer than was anticipated. But how long can you hold it together? You have to start winning. You have to beat them down. I constantly try to get people to do lawsuits. I'll come do your lawsuit. I'll stand up there and I'll haul out all these pictures and I'll do this and I'll do that. But the lawyers are, generally speaking, not ready to take cases that they're not going to win. They're very involved with, they're very involved with religious liberty cases, which are important. But if you're raising kids from kindergarten on, to be puppets, constantly looking for the next fix of one kind or another, how long will you be able to sustain those religious liberties?
That's right. I'd pass on being able to get on being able to refuse making an LGBT cake to going down to the college campus and suing their asses off to get the child pornography off the freaking walls so that some young kid at 17, 18 years old don't walk in there and look at that and have something awaken deep inside of them. And then they go out and rape some little kid or some girl or some boy and hurt somebody because they let their eyes feast on something that was so wicked. And that's why it was placed on them walls. For them to feast on that wickedness.
I'll go with you. I'll do the lawsuit. Get somebody to sue.
Hallelujah. I know that people would be willing to jump in on that and sue. So I'm going to start making some calls.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. And I'll pull together, when you're ready, I'll pull together some stuff from the Mapplethorpe trial, which laid the foundation for people thinking it's okay in all these museums, that it's art, Excuse me.
Mm,
No,
mhm.
Oh,
not Art. The guy, he should be in prison, you know?
yeah, they should all be in prison.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we're gonna jump over to your website,
Thank you.
and so it's drjudithreisman.com.
Well, the big one is the Reisman Institute. The
Yes, we got
Reisman.
that. I already placed that link in the chat for everybody. So, do you want to go to the books and stuff at the Reisman Institute?
You
We
know,
can go there right here from here. Here we go.
wherever they are.
There we go.
Oh, isn't that nice?
It is very nice. Now let's proceed to the Reisman Institute.
See, there you are. It's so great. That was me with my little daughter.
Yes.
Oh,
You know, last week on our show, we read about your daughter from your book, and we read some excerpts from your book about why you are the soldier that you are.
Yeah.
We just so appreciate you and all that you do, because our children do have a right to a moral society. They do have the right to not be indoctrinated and brainwashed, and to not go to school and be told that they're not what they are, and that they can't be this, and we have, our children have the right to not have to go to school in first grade and be taught how to put a condom on and erect mannequin. Our children have the right to go to school and not be told, well, pick your bracelet off the wall today of what you want to be today. If you want to be he, her, them, z's, or we, you know, and so our children do have a right to moral society, Dr. Reisman. So thank you so very much for all that you do. You are so appreciated, more than you possibly know.
yeah.
Oh, shucks.
You know, I just want to say, at risk of being melodramatic, but I'm a writer, so forgive me. But, you know, I spent a good 25 years of my life growing up in the church, hearing about these Old Testament pagan cultures who would sacrifice their children to Molech, and thought, what
Right.
horrible, horrible people. They're horrible. Who could imagine it? And where we are in a society now, we're letting our children live, but we are destroying them from the moment they come out of the womb. We're ruining them. And I just think it would be more mercy to throw them in the fire. We are worse than what those pagans have done. We need to open our eyes and recognize what we have let happen here and repent.
Amen.
Yeah. So that it's critical that people learn what was done to them. I've lectured a few times in the ex homosexual groups, you know, only a few times. They don't invite me. You know, and I'm struck by the relief that people express when they come up to me afterwards, that they read this and they believe that, and you know, that's people have to know history.
Yes.
So they understand what was done to them.
Man, you know,
Yes.
Reisman, don't worry about not getting invited to a lot of the ex-homosexual groups. I don't get invited to the ex-homosexual groups. Because, you know, you talk a lot about our men being masculine, women being feminine, you know, the two roles. And there's a lot of ex-homosexuals out there that if you saw them walking down the street or you met them, you would automatically assume that they were still a homosexual, because they haven't allowed the total transformation of the Holy Spirit to allow them to be the man that they were born to be, and act like a man and be masculine. And it doesn't mean, you know, scratching your gonads and belching and hoorah football. It just means being void of feminine features and appearance, you know. And so that's why. And you know, you talk a lot of truth and you talk about pedophilia, and that's something that the ex-homosexuals, a lot of them don't want to talk about. And I actually had a very large ex-homosexual ministry contact me about 2-3 years ago, and they said to me, David, look, we'll give you a paid position, David, just to go out and give testimony if you stop talking about the pedophilia and stop talking about what goes on in the world we used to be a part of. And I said, why don't you talk about it? Because they don't need to know about that. And so what that told me was as large as that ex-homosexual ministry is, they still identify Christians as they, which means he has not been changed, he has not been transformed, and he has not been indwelt with the Holy Ghost of the one true living God. So there it is. So don't feel bad if you don't get invited, because I am one of them and I don't get invited.
No, listen, if I started feeling bad about not being invited places, yeah.
Amen. I say that all the time. I find joy and encouragement in not being invited, because it lets me know that I'm doing a little something that somebody else ain't doing, because they got invited and I didn't.
Yeah,
so
no,
I must be doing something right.
It's important. Yeah.
Amen. You know what? We're coming to a close, and this has just been so amazing.
It's been awesome. Thank you so much
really
for coming.
Appreciated, really have. I have appreciated the opportunity to share some of my wisdom at my age. I'm 85 almost.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah. So, you want to sort of get that out, and you can do it with books, you can do it with videos, but it's critical to try and reach out to people, and to people who will reach out to people. Yeah.
And that's what's important. What's important is that, I want everybody to jump in and click on those links that I put into the chat, and we'll share more links in the comment section of this video once it's done processing, and we'll just make sure the information is available. Dr. Reisman, we'd love to have you come back on.
Absolutely.
And I accept.
Absolutely.
Awesome, because I mean, you are like the model of what to do and how to do it in this realm. You are the model of what a soldier on the front lines should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And
and faithfulness, the perseverance. Most people, they get into a fight, they're all excited about it, and they get knocked down a couple times and they're like, forget it. Back to the corporate world for their 6 figures. So to have persevered with this much opposition and hatred and accusations, and to just keep going, I admire your thick skin, and it's something that I desperately want more of.
Amen. And so we're gonna have you back on like real soon, because I've still got like 8 tabs open that I didn't even get to or go to. And I know Vicky has questions on her in front of her that she didn't.
Oh gosh.
And so we're gonna close the show out.
I was all the time, I know. I'm leaving most of March. I'll be in Israel. I'm doing a conference in Israel on the connection between prostitution, pornography, and trafficking. What?
Do you need an assistant?
Yeah, right. I'll carry your bags.
I have to say, that Israel is one of the five countries that has now adopted the Nordic model, which is penalizing the Johns instead of the women, and trying to help the women. So I'm very pleased, and the gal who's keynoting it with me, it was the designer of the Nordic model from Sweden. So that's nice.
Well, praise the Lord for that.
Sweden does stupid things, but this one was good.
Yeah.
There you go.
met up with Dr. Judith Reisman, a world historian in the destruction of human sexuality. Dr. Reisman is recognized as an expert witness exposing the sex industry's hidden agenda.
Playboy
Magazine.
sued you, or you sued
No,
Playboy?
Playboy sued me for libel and slander.
And what happened?
I won.
She's fought the pornography industry for decades and even won a lawsuit against Playboy.
So how did we get here to where we're at today? Because I don't think pornography has always been such an epidemic cancer within our society like it is today.
No, not at all. We were, up to the end of the Second World War, a conservative Judeo-Christian nation. The turning point for all that was Dr. Alfred Kinsey, his book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, 1948. He was the father of the sexual revolution, and therefore the father of everything that has come from that. And certainly one of the key things was pornography.
Dr. Alfred Kinsey ushered the destruction of our nation's moral code with his books, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male and Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, known as the Kinsey Reports. The world recognized him as the leading scientific expert on human sexuality. The reports claimed that humans were sexual from birth, and that what we deemed as immoral sexual behavior was actually normal, thus making it moral. Once a biologist who studied gall wasp, Kinsey's obsession with sexuality led him to found the Kinsey Institute for Sex Research at Indiana State University. What people to this day are not aware of were the methods he used to collect his data.
And I looked at the graphs that he provided, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34 tables. And I said, wait a minute, that's a 2-month-old baby. How does he know a 2-month-old baby did or did not have an orgasm? And then table 34, a 4-year-old child, 26 orgasms in 24 hours. That's an around-the-clock experiment.
Wow, that's torture.
That's torture, you bet. He also actually employed bona fide pedophiles to do what they did to children for his so-called data.
Kinsey wanted to prove that we are sexual from birth, so it wasn't surprising that he drew his data from pedophiles, rapists, and murderers. They were the perfect sample because obviously a rapist pedophile will have a skewed perspective on sexuality, convincing himself that his victim finds pleasure in the act of being raped. Using a stopwatch and a ledger, they recorded their sexual experiments, systematically molesting thousands of young children under the guise of science. This research was compiled in his books, Sexual Behavior of the Human Male and Sexual Behavior in the Human Female.
He said I had 196 pre-adolescents under 12, and he broke them up into 6 categories. And fainting, convulsions, screaming, writhing, striking what he called their partner, that's somebody who's raping them. Okay. And they were trying to get away, but he said they enjoyed it. They definitely enjoyed it.
The research in Kinsey's books were partly based on the collection of data and confessions of a Nazi pedophile during World War II, Dr. Fritz von Balusek, who raped hundreds of children. After the war, the Nazi officer was charged and put on trial for the murder of a 10-year-old girl. They found detailed records of von Balusek's heinous sexual acts with children, revealing his correspondence with Kinsey. Dr. Kinsey, who was fully aware of the Nazi officer's atrocities, warned him in his letters to be careful and encouraged him to continue his research. During the trial, the judge said, "I got the impression that you got to the children in order to impress Kinsey and to deliver him material." To his surprise, Balusek replied, "Kinsey himself asked me for that."
Now that became the foundation for the sex educational structure that fed itself into what we are teaching our children right now as we sit here and speak.
I venture to suggest that what we are putting into our books on sex education today is based almost fully upon philosophic guess.
And of course, it was the foundation of all the changes in our laws, the sodomy laws, the abortion laws, everything else. I mean, he's there. His handprints are on everything that deals with sexuality. from all these people, he was able to tell us, quote, the truth about ourselves, the truth about what we were really doing behind closed doors. And he lied about our fathers, my father's generation and grandfathers. He lied about them because he projected onto them what he himself was doing.
What he was struggling with.
Yes.
It didn't take long for Kinsey to deceive the world with his fraudulent data, convincing us that we were sexually repressed and ignorant to the truth.
First, the media drank the Kool-Aid, and they were carefully taken care of by the Kinsey Institute to drink the Kool-Aid. Okay. And then once they drank the Kool-Aid, the scientists, quote unquote, drank the Kool-Aid, and then the legislators drank the Kool-Aid, and then the lawmakers drank the Kool-Aid, and here we are.
Essentially, what Kinsey did was he changed our belief about ourselves. This change of belief naturally changed our behavior. Soon, Kinsey's ideas permeated everything in our society, from our legal system, reducing the penalty for sexual crimes and legalizing abortion, the media promoting his philosophy to the educational system, teaching children his views on sexuality. What's more, the pharmaceutical industry capitalized from the sexual revolution. We saw the emergence of STDs, sexual enhancers, and the morning after pill. The divorce rate soared along with sexual crime. As a people, we would never be the same again. Our innocence was lost forever. Ultimately, Kinsey's fraudulent data led to the legalization of pornography.
One of the virgins in college that read Kinsey and believed him was a guy named Hugh Hefner. Okay, so he's in college.
So Hefner was an advocate for Kinsey's.
He reads Kinsey and he says, hey, everybody's been lying to me. They've all been diddling around doing all this stuff, and I have been standing here being a nice guy. Forget it. He says, I will be, and I'm quoting him, Kinsey's pamphleteer. I will be Kinsey's pamphleteer.
Really?
So from there, he began to advocate for changes in the law, and he created a magazine called Playboy, which then he said would reflect what Kinsey had found about human sexuality.
In his fraudulent
data. America was educated by a pedophile whose work was labeled as science. Just as Darwin was the father of legitimizing evolution, Kinsey was the father of legitimizing the sexual revolution and all that's based upon that today.
Sure enough, Hefner was true to his word. Not only did he popularize pornography on a global scale, he also helped to legalize it.
I want a congressional investigation of Kinsey. At some point, we may, in fact, be able to get a public to be aware that they've been raped. The whole nation has been raped. That is what's happened to us. We have been raped, and you cannot expect to survive a rape without a great deal of illness, pain, and trauma. And we've gone through it. Now we've got to find a way to get out of it.
So whatever happened to Kinsey? Well, this glorified psychopath eventually died of a slow and painful disease called orchitis, a lethal infection of the testicles due to years of brutal masochistic masturbation and other vile sexual acts. How ironic. The preacher of sexual liberation died from following his own message. Sadly, his destructive work continues to live on with his lies, and to this day, we continue to fund the Kinsey Institute with our tax dollars. Now, for any man who's trapped in pornography, he must first realize that the root of the problem is based on a lie by Kinsey and a lie from the enemy of his soul. You need to realize you've been duped. You've been suckered, because ultimately, Kinsey's purpose was to remake man into his image, which really wasn't a pretty one.
Hello, I'm Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. A number of years ago, I starred in The Chapman Report, a film about the sex studies of Dr. Alfred Kinsey. Like most Americans, I felt at the time that Dr. Kinsey's work was groundbreaking, and it was. But since then, serious questions have been raised about the Kinsey research methods, serious enough to warrant a closer look. What would you think if you learned that some of the most important scientific research of the century may have been based on fraud? Or if not fraud, criminal experimentation on children funded by the taxpayer? What if you learned that the results of this research are exerting a profound influence on our society today, ranging from how we deal with sex offenders to how, when, and what our children are being taught about sex? Not to mention why. Every parent in America needs to know the facts behind Alfred Kinsey's inclusion of children in his famous sex studies in the late 1940s. Recent revelations about government-sponsored radiation experiments remind us once more of the dangers of projects that violate informed consent and the standards of common decency. As you watch this story unfold, you will learn how America has unknowingly put its children at risk in the name of science. And you may also join me in asking, what happened to Dr. Kinsey's smallest subjects? Where are the children of Table 34?
Children, our most precious gift and our hope for the future. Once upon a time, children were free to roam their neighborhoods without worry. Parents could count on the good intentions of neighbors, school officials, and other adults to keep their children safe. But in recent years, parents have had to take special measures to ensure that their children not come to harm. Their fears are not unfounded. Many children have fallen victim to sexual abuse. How do we go from a safe, caring environment for children to one in which parents are terrified that their children are at risk in just a few short years? Part of the answer may be found in Indiana, at the world-famous Kinsey Institute. In 1948, a zoologist named Alfred C. Kinsey shocked the world with his pioneering study, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. Although many scientists were critical of Kinsey's methods, the media popularized Kinsey's findings about sex. By 1981, Dr. Judith Reisman uncovered the role of child sexual abuse in the Kinsey studies in a paper presented to the Fifth World Congress of Sexology in Jerusalem. She documented Kinsey's reliance on the systematic molestation of more than 300 infants and children from 2 months old to 15 years of age. Graph tables depicting sexual activity in children use identical criteria as those in the tables on adult subjects.
Then I went back and I took a look at the Kinsey report, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. And as I reviewed the tables, it struck me as clear as day. How could they get this data? Where would they get these data? How did they know that a 2-month-old baby did or did not have an orgasm? How did they get a record of 26 orgasms in 24 hours for a 4-year-old? A 4-year-old.
If these experiments took place, they involved acts to which no child could provide consent and for which no parent or guardian could provide consent on behalf of the child. Therefore, we're talking about criminal activity, the criminal sexual abuse of children.
Research scientist Gordon Muir sees broad ramifications from Kinsey's work. According to Dr. Muir, who helped edit and publish Judith Reisman's and Ed Eichel's 1990 book, Kinsey, Sex and Fraud,
children as young as 2 months of age are featured in tables. In some cases, 188 children in one table. And the legend beneath the table says, timed with a second hand or stopwatch. The understanding that we have of childhood sexuality and normal childhood sexual development, as it is believed and taught in academia today, comes from the experimental evidence documented in Kinsey's Mail report published in 1948, with the child sexuality tables that we have just discussed. It is absolutely astonishing that this is taken as the basis for what we understand to be normal childhood sexual development. And when I try and explain this to colleagues in the type of science that I'm involved in what I call the harder sciences of biology and medicine, statistics, immunology, they frankly do not believe what I'm trying to tell them. And the only way that I can convince them of the truth of this is to go to the library, pull off the shelf one of Alfred Kinsey's books, and show them what in fact is inside. And it is quite shocking.
Based on the Kinsey data, sex researchers formulated a theory of child sexuality that's influenced everything from laws against molestation to how and when sex education is taught. Few professionals would disagree that Dr. Kinsey has been the most influential figure in the study of sex, particularly the concept of child sexuality.
He did not openly promote pedophilia, but he provided the, quote, scientific, unquote, basis for it. He felt the main problem with adult-child sexual relations was hysteria and overreaction on the part of parents and authorities. He believed that young boys needed the help of older people to develop effective sexual techniques. And he recorded that adult sexual contacts with young girls are a source of pleasure to these girls and may lead to better socio-sexual development in their later lives. His co-author, Wardell Pomeroy, a prominent sexologist, has written that the Kinsey research uncovered, quote, many beautiful and mutually satisfying relationships between fathers and daughters. Pomeroy also, in his sex education book, Boys and Sex, refers to the possibility of, quote, loving sexual relationships, unquote, between children and animals.
Children have been increasingly portrayed sexually in major pornographic magazines.
In our study conducted for the U.S. Justice Department, particularly juvenile justice and delinquency prevention, we came up with some pretty surprising findings on the images of children in Playboy and Penthouse and Hustler. In particular, Playboy and Penthouse was surprising to us. We were instructed to do the research because of the finding of these kinds of materials being used in sexual activities, sexual crimes really against children. Most disturbing was that 29% of the visuals, that is the photographs, included some sort of nude or genital display. Very, very surprising. 21% were visually exposed and sexualized. 20% had some sort of genital activity taking place of some type. 10% involved force, 10% killing or murder.
Before Kinsey, psychologists had rejected the idea of children as sexually viable until the age of puberty. Earlier this century, Sigmund Freud paved the way for Kinsey by asserting that children were sexual, but that their sexuality was latent, that is, not acted upon until puberty. Kinsey's report radically altered this perception, spawning an entire industry based on the notion that children have a right to sexual relations at any age. The Kinsey perception of the right of children to have sex at any age has resulted in challenges to laws protecting children from sexual exploitation.
In Florida recently, a state court judge threw out several cases that had been brought under the statutory rape laws. Citing privacy grounds, the judge found that minors under the age of 16 had a constitutional right to engage in sexual activity. Several courts have recently held that parents do not have a right to stop school districts from handing out condoms to their children. Again, you see in school districts and courts and the media, the Kinsey philosophy that children should be free and autonomous to decide for themselves what sort of sexual activity, what sort of sexual behavior they should engage in without any kind of regulation or restriction from the state or their parents, has begun to chip away at the protections that our legal system had previously provided to children.
Some scientists feel that an inquiry of the Kinsey Institute is long overdue.
I have been in contact with perhaps the best-known fraud specialist in this country over a period of years concerning this Kinsey research fraud allegation. The person I'm referring to, of course, is Walter Stewart, who is well known in Congress and in the scientific community for his work in the Baltimore case particularly, and in other cases. Now, Stewart is firmly of the opinion that there is something here that needs to be investigated and has told me so many times.
Muir says that such an effort may be mounted outside the United States and cites a letter by Walter Stewart to the Canadian Medical Journal.
What Stewart said was that he finds the evidence, that is, for fraud and ethical violations in research, compelling, since the evidence comes almost entirely from Kinsey's book itself. He says, I find it disturbing and believe it requires investigation.
Dr. Muir says he hopes that Congress will investigate the Kinsey Institute once it's widely known that children may have been used in sexual experimentation.
Because there is a mess here that has to be cleared up in the backyard of American science, and it would indeed be tragic if it gets cleared up from elsewhere first.
Important questions need to be answered. Where are the children today? How were they procured for the experiments? Did their parents know they were being used in sessions with avowed pedophiles? Where are the children of Table 34?
I'm concerned about these people who must now be in their 50s, that they must have had some very difficult experiences following these experiments, and it would be good really if they could be contacted even for therapeutic purposes at this stage. I often wonder if they'll come forward when we're speaking in lectures or speaking on radio or whatever it may be. I've been waiting to hear for some of these people to remember the experience and to come forward and say, yes, I was one of those.
Based on 12,000 interviews, empirical observation, and Kinsey's own ideas about sexuality, the Kinsey Report, as it came to be known, had enormous cultural and scientific impact.
You could use the findings from the survey to counter the moral judgments of other people. And that's really the importance of Kinsey. As Kinsey moves the argument away from the old kind of sterile debate about morality, for which there is no solution, to a place where people can start talking about sexuality as in a different kind of way, looking to different kind of standards.
Kinsey concluded that Americans' sex lives were far more varied than had been thought, and that children were sexual from birth. But the Kinsey books have serious flaws, as has been noted by the National Research Council and Dr. Abraham Maslow, who warned Kinsey that sex surveys tend to skew the data toward the sexually promiscuous and unconventional. Because sexual manipulation of children is illegal, the Kinsey studies have served as virtually the sole source for sex researchers. The Kinsey findings about children are based on interviews with and records kept by pedophiles, which he described as adult males who've had sexual contacts with younger boys and who, with their adult backgrounds, are able to recognize and interpret the boys' experiences.
As a practitioner, a psychologist, I cannot see that this is the way in which we collect information about normal childhood sexuality. To get pedophiles to go out and do experiments on children is not how we learn about normality.
Kinsey acknowledges that some of the experiments involve the use of physical force with unwilling participants. Kinsey describes what he terms orgasms by the children, a gradual and sometimes prolonged buildup to orgasm, which involves still more violent convulsions of the whole body, heavy breathing, groaning, sobbing, or more violent cries, sometimes with an abundance of tears, especially among young children. Some of the children exhibited extreme trembling, collapse, loss of color, and sometimes fainting. The males in the present group will fight away from the partner and may make violent attempts to avoid climax, although they derive definite pleasure from the situation. A fretful babe quiets down under the initial sexual stimulation, is distracted from other activities, begins rhythmic pelvic thrust, becomes tense as climax approaches, is thrown into convulsive action, often with violent arm and leg movements, sometimes with weeping at the moment of climax. According to Paul Gebhard, a Kinsey Report co-author and former president of the Kinsey Institute, the researchers were aware that the experiments were illegal. We've always insisted on maintaining confidentiality, even at the cost of thereby becoming immoral at best and criminal at worst, said Gebhardt. An example of criminality is our refusal to cooperate with authorities in apprehending a pedophile we had interviewed who is being sought for a sex murder.
Kinsey would have done business with the devil if it helped the research, and this is true. The research was absolutely paramount. And he was astute enough to stay out of trouble. He got in practically no trouble, but he worked at it.
Related to that, of course, is the question is, did parents give consent to what was being done? And nobody has indicated to us that consent was given. Indeed, these co-workers seem to indicate to us that consent was not given, and they didn't really see it as terribly important because this wasn't going to be particularly harmful to the children anyway.
There is another possibility regarding Kinsey's data on children, that the experiments never took place.
We have the other serious implication that the data are being used as if they were real in order to generate a whole view of child sexuality and availability of children in sexual encounters, which is based on nothing.
If that is so, then scientific fraud may have occurred. In either case, the reliance on reports of sexual torture of children under the auspices of federally supported research cries out for examination, especially since Kinsey's research had such a profound effect on the entire sex research field.
I went back to get a degree and went into the human sexuality program at New York University. And it was when I was in that program that I began to learn and see the indoctrination of what has been called the Kinsey Grand Scheme. Now that term comes from Wardell Pomeroy, Kinsey's closest associate, but I experienced it firsthand in an international health seminar held in Holland, organized by my professor, Dr. Derek Calderwood. Calderwood initiated nude body workshops in which he would give quasi-medical excuses for men to touch each other's genitals and for women to interact in different feely-touchy situations.
The Kinsey Institute has dominated the world of sexology through the migration of Kinsey disciples to several key centers of sexology, including New York University, the University of Pennsylvania, and the Institute for the Advanced Study of Human Sexuality in San Francisco. These three institutions account for the lion's share of the academic credentialing of sex educators in the United States. Working with the Kinsey team was Dr. Mary Calderon, who was medical director of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America from 1953 to 1964, before co-founding the Sex Information and Education Council of the United States, better known as SIECUS.
She formed that organization with Lester Kirkendall, another pioneering sexologist who was the teacher and the mentor of Derek Calderwood, my professor.
Also involved was Kinsey's co-author, Wardell Pomeroy, a founding member who also served as president of SIECUS as recently as 1975.
In terms of Lester Kirkendall, in 1985, he made a statement in an article entitled Sex Education in the Future that I think is worth noting. He says that programs of the future will probe sexual expression with same-sex partners and even across generational lines. With a diminished sense of guilt, these patterns will become legitimate, and the emphasis on normality and abnormality will be much diminished with these future trends.
The most obvious impact of this effort is to demystify the taboos of sexuality in sex education classes to very young children. Many sex education curricula now begin in kindergarten and continue through high school, often under AIDS prevention. The message to parents, if we don't begin teaching children about safe sex as early as possible, including every variation, then they may get AIDS.
Mrs. Smith or Ms. Smith from somewhere in Ohio, who goes for her 3-unit training in human sexuality because she has to teach human sexuality to the kids and she has to teach AIDS prevention. She goes to an accredited sex educator, And she will be trained in the Kinsey model. That is the only model that she can be trained in. And as a result, then, she has to set aside whatever value structure, whatever moral structure she's been carrying all these years, because she's been told that the science has proven that children are sexual from birth, that children have orgasmic potential from birth, that this, therefore, can be perfectly fine.
How can you be protected from AIDS, like when you're having sex?
Well, one of the best ways, Magic, is wear a condom, isn't it?
Yes, it's the safest way is to wear a condom.
As a result, some schools and even a documentary presented by Nickelodeon are instructing children as young as 8 years old in how to use a condom.
You roll it down the penis, and that protects the man when his penis is inside the woman's vagina.
Children are also told how to perform anal sex. At a Safe Sex Youth Conference in New York in 1994, children as young as 12 were given graphic brochures advising boys to enjoy safe sex with men and encouraging girls to experiment with lesbian sex practices that could cause sterility.
Nowhere in the program curriculum that was developed to be the guidelines for future sex education was there anything that suggested sick sexual behavior, any form of sexual activity such that might be categorized or abnormality.
The Kinsey view of child sexuality has also been promulgated by Dr. John Money, perhaps the most prominent sex researcher in America. A founding board member of SICAS, Dr. Money has written numerous books, as well as hundreds of papers, reviews, and textbook chapters on the subject of sex. In 1990, Dr. June Reinisch dedicated her book, The Kinsey Institute New Report on Sex, to Dr. Money, whom she describes as one of my mentors. Recently, Dr. Money was interviewed by Pideka, the journal of pedophilia, which is published in the Netherlands. The journal argues for man-boy sex and contains advertisements for the North American Man-Boy Love Association and other pro-pedophile groups. Kinsey Institute associate Dr. Vern Bulow is on Pideka's editorial board, which issued this statement of purpose. The starting point of Pideka is necessarily our consciousness of ourselves as pedophiles.
But when you look at the journal Pideka, the Dutch journal, you will see that on the board of directors, you have people like Vern Bulow. Vern Bulow was the president of the Society for the Scientific Study of Sex when they formed the accrediting committee for future university programs that give degrees to sex educators. Vern Bulow did the foreword for Edward Brangersma's 2 volumes, Loving Boys. John Money of Johns Hopkins Hospital and the mentor of June Reinisch was interviewed in Pideka. And of course, he's one of the people saying that sex with children can be an enriching experience and doesn't harm the child.
In Dr. Money's interview in Pideka, he was asked about child sexuality. His reply, if I were to see the case of a boy aged 10 or 12 who's intensely attracted toward a man in his 20s or 30s, if the relationship is totally mutual and the bonding is genuinely totally mutual, then I would not call it pathological in any way. This attitude mirrors that of Dr. Kinsey, who once wrote that it is difficult to understand why a child, except for its cultural conditioning, should be disturbed at having its genitalia touched.
In 1965, the Kinsey team published the book Sex Offenders, which argued that sexual behavior was so varied that certain activities should not be singled out for harsh punishment. During the past 10 years, reports of child abuse cases have soared to more than 2.5 million annually. Although many of these cases have proved to be false reports, it is clear that child abuse and the perception of child abuse is a growing problem. Increasingly, child abuse experts are expressing concern about Kinsey's impact on the way people view sexuality.
One of the objectives of Kinsey-type programming is to change the concept of the family. And if you think about it, if Heather has 2 mommies and Daddy has a male roommate, in a way, you're denormalizing the heterosexual nuclear family. And if you remember from the pedophile type statements in the writings, for example, of Theo Sanford. He said that if children could be weaned away from the nuclear family, they could then form emotional attachments with others beyond the family. So in a sense, the systematic destruction of the concept of a family with a mother and father, and with the family breakups and divorces that are occurring, it's a very opportune time.
Attempts to uncover evidence regarding the experiments on children had been rebuffed by the Kinsey Institute. Former director Dr. June Reinisch, interim director Dr. Stephanie Sanders, and other Kinsey personnel either declined or did not respond to interview requests. Dr. Money also declined to be interviewed. Child Magazine featured an article by Dr. Reinisch urging parents to regard their children as sexually active and to promote more sexual activity.
Given its critical role in overhauling a culture that used to value and protect children above all else, the Kinsey Report is long overdue for scientific scrutiny.
He used data from the rape of children, as we've discussed, some as young as 2 months, to demonstrate and prove childhood sexual capacity. He concealed the full nature of these experiments, and he concealed information on who performed these experiments. He extrapolated these data to describe normal childhood development. He did not follow up these abused children as was ethically and morally required, though the identities of many of these children are known and known today, and they still could be followed up and should be. Furthermore, he shielded criminals who were involved in this work, including one murderer that we know of, from the police. If I have not said enough about the need for this research to be investigated, then I doubt if there's really anything else that could be said.
These questions need to be answered. How were the children procured for the experiments recorded in Table 34? Where are they now? Most would be in their 50s. Also, many of the Kinsey associates themselves are still around, but most of them are elderly. It's important that they be given the opportunity to shed light on what happened before it's too late, before any more children are victimized.
One of our big problems, of course, is the way in which the Kinsey model of sexual education has gone from the university level, that is being taught at the university level through the Kinsey people, for teachers and so forth, from the university to the college, from the college to the junior college, from the junior college then to the high school. As our teachers have become trained, quote unquote, in the field of human sexuality, they then train those below them who train those below them. That then filtered out. So we began in 1953, really. 1948 was Kinsey's book on men. 1953, women. We began to train people at that university level with all of this false data, all the fraudulent data. That then filters down to to high school, to junior high school. And now we've got this thing spreading out so that we have teachers and we have parents in an uproar all over the United States of America, being forced indeed to teach things that we are arguing are fundamentally fraudulent. And fraudulent means that you'll get bad results. You get bad results when you have bad data.